Oh, there he is. All right.
Good afternoon.
Hello, how are you in your trademark bow tie?
Happy to be here with you. Listen, when were you at the University of Texas at Austin?
So I was just telling these guys, you were 10 years ahead of me. I was there from 2003 to 2012.
Okay.
And actually, we have some other overlaps. We weren't there at the same time, but so I did my German. So I'm a political scientist and I study Europe, and I did my German language training at the Goethe Institute in Konstanz. And then
wow.
That was to the day, and then I did a Fulbright later. And so I was reading your book, and I'm like, oh yeah, same thing. And
Yeah,
actually,
I actually know Constance because one of the my wife and I went to visit the father and mother of one of my cello students from Bonn.
Mm-hmm.
He was a professor of French at the Université Constance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's where
Very
I was.
Nice.
Yeah, and just so you know, we are recording and streaming already. So
Oh, okay. Fine.
I always try to make sure people know we're already on. But yeah, and I want to, we have so much overlap. I don't know if you had a chance to see my book, Radical Empathy, is out.
Yes. As a matter of fact, not only do I have your book, it's right here.
Oh, very good.
Right there. And but we've given it to our, I'm giving it to my president's student cabinet as a gift, a thank you gift.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
That's so nice. I did a workshop with the faculty there. And that was a really great, and I've been to Richmond several times.
You did that this year, right?
Yes, just a few months ago.
That's right. I remember. Yes. It's coming back.
And then Andrea Simpson and Ernest McGowan are actually, Ernest has been my mentee since he was an undergrad at UT.
Undergraduate at Texas. Yeah.
Yes, and then Andrea is I've known her since I was a professor at University of Washington in 1999.
Yes.
So,
in fact, she's coming we're going to have tea with her in a couple of weeks.
Very good. She's a wonderful person, very much one of the people who's watched out for me.
Yeah, nice. Very, very nice. I haven't finished your book yet, but I'm enjoying it immensely.
Yes, thank you. Well, like I said, we have a lot of overlap. I was going to warn you, I'm going to read from a passage in the book that I really connected to, but I'll let you, just so you know, we're at 12 o'clock. So Mike will bring us in, but this is a very free flowing conversation. This is Mike Palmer, my buddy and colleague.
Hi, Mike.
Hi, nice to meet you.
As you can tell, though, he knows we're going to dominate the conversation because we have so much to talk about.
Make my job easy today. Yeah.
In any case, so this is streaming on Facebook Live. So hello to our friends on Facebook. And we're also, we'll be recording this for future people to watch and for our podcast. So this is going to have lots of distribution. So if you have friends who are missing out on it today, they have plenty of opportunity to catch it later. We also post it on our YouTube channel.
Terrific.
So Mike, you want to bring us in?
Yeah, let me do that. So I'll count us in all official and then we'll get started. So in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to This Week in Higher Ed. Mike Palmer here, as always, joined by Dr. Terri Givens. And we have a special guest today in Dr. Ronald Crutcher. And there's a lot of overlap between Dr. Crutcher's new book, I Had No Idea You Were Black, and Terri's new book, Radical Empathy. So I think there's plenty for the two of you to discuss, and I'll try to get a question or two in edgewise along the way. But just to begin, Terri, welcome, and welcome, Dr. Crutcher.
Thank you
so much.
Pleased to be here.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we normally begin with a little bit of check-in time just to talk about what's new and noteworthy in the world around us. So Terri, you were mentioning when we were setting up here that the COVID rates in California seem to be coming down. I'm based out of Brooklyn. We're also seeing things moving in a good direction. Obviously, the vaccine adoption is something that I think all of us are looking at carefully. And Dr. Crutcher, I think we'd love to get some of your perspective on that as someone who's responsible for the University of Richmond. So, we talk in the abstract about a lot of stuff that I imagine you're really living and breathing day to day. But maybe beginning with you, Terri, anything new, exciting, top of mind as we're just checking in and kicking off here today?
I don't know if we talked about my move to McGill.
I think we mentioned it last time, but it was still news. Now you've had a little time to settle in. So do you want to reshare that news?
Yes, that I will be starting as a faculty member in the Department of Political Science at McGill University in Montreal, and also working with the provosts on their strategy to confront anti-Black racism. And the big part of that is going to be really recruiting Black faculty there. They want to try to increase the Black faculty by 85 faculty in the next 10 years. And actually, there's some overlap with Dr. Crutcher's experience at Wheaton College in particular, and try to diversify the faculty there. But yeah, so that's my big news. And then just we're all getting vaccinated, and we've had some interesting times with the high school and their schedule and all of that. But it's going. I think we're all learning a lot from what's happening now, and I'm going to learn a lot because I will be teaching remotely in the fall. So I'm looking forward. Anybody out there who has tips for me on teaching online, please share. But they have really good resources at McGill for that. So, and I really was very upfront about wanting to be a faculty member when I get to McGill. I'm looking forward to getting back to teaching and all of that.
Yeah, and Montreal is an amazing town, as is Richmond. So that's my segue,
That's
Dr.
one of my
Crutcher.
favorite cities.
Yeah. So can you catch us up on who you are and how you've been lately?
Absolutely. Well, first, let me say congratulations to you, Terri. I love McGill is a magnificent university, and I have great music faculty there too. By the way, I have several friends who are on the music faculty, and I've had several friends who've sent their children to go to school there. But yeah, Richmond. I mean, in terms of the virus, fortunately, the rates have gone down in Virginia. Our governor, from the very beginning, has done a spectacular job. Our governor, Dr. Ralph Northam, is a physician and has been very attentive from the very beginning. So we felt very comfortable being in the state of Virginia. My wife and I are fully vaccinated, and our daughter, who's 35, has had her first vaccine and will have her second one next week. And she's getting the Moderna, so we're going to go up and be there with her just in case she has issues afterwards, because she lives by herself. With respect to the university, I'm very proud of what we've done this year. I mean, a year ago, we were going crazy. I mean, hair on fire. Well, I don't have any hair, but if I had hair, it would have been on fire. Not, trying to figure out what to do, because we are a small liberal arts university. We have a total of 4,000 students, including a law school, 5 different schools. And so, and our value added is the interpersonal touch, the in-person experience that our students have. And so we were trying to figure out how to replicate that, or how to have some semblance of that within the context of COVID. And, first semester, about 67% of our classes were face-to-face, with the rest being either remote or hybrid, slightly higher this semester. But we've done incredibly well this year with our rates of infection. We had a blow up just before Thanksgiving. We've been going between 1% to 2% each week, and it went up to about 11% because of, I don't need to get into details, but party. and we sent them home just before Thanksgiving, thank God. So, and this semester, at the beginning, the rates were a little higher, I think because people are out, again, coming back to us. We tested everyone, but now for the last couple of weeks, we've been at 0. And this is the last, our commencement's on Sunday, so we're done now. Yeah. Summer school will be done remotely. Of course, the big issue right now is the fall. our hope is to be back in person in the fall, but what that means, we don't really know yet. So we developed a 4-stage physical distancing platform or framework. And we're in so red, orange, yellow, green. We're in orange now. We're going to move to yellow next week, which gives a lot more freedom. But you know, we're in the midst now of trying to decide, will we require the vaccine?
Yeah, I was going to ask that.
Everyone, or just students? And so we're in the middle of having those conversations right at this moment.
Yeah.
And I mean, as you may know, I'm stepping down in August, and I'll be doing a sabbatical for 2 years, and then I'll come back as a university professor and be joining the faculty in our leadership school.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And I did see when I was doing a little bit of research that you're a renowned cellist, and you were playing the cello for your students online
That's
a
right.
year ago. And it did strike me because even your tone at the time was a little more somber, because it was a very difficult time. And it did make me reflect on the year that was. But do you have any thoughts on the importance of music and the arts to get us through these difficult times?
Oh, well, yeah. As a matter of fact, earlier this afternoon, at noon, as a matter of fact, I taped a segment for the Memoir International Violin Competition, which is taking place, well, was to have taken place in Richmond. It'll be virtual now for 14 days, where we talked about the fact that, and I think that, just as I said in that recording, at the very beginning of the pandemic, I relied on music as a refuge, if you will, because I think music can help us transcend the vicissitudes. Art in general, not just music. Dance, theater, you know, poetry can help you transcend the vicissitudes of everyday life. But I think in this year in particular, it's been more important. And in fact, we have made it possible for our students to participate in arts activities, even though we've been remote this year. So for instance, last fall, we did a performance, our students did a performance of a Shakespeare play in our Greek theater with limited seating, and we streamed it. So I watched it online because 2 of my mentees were in it. Our orchestra has been doing that. The dance troupe has done that. And so that's been really important for them, because when you're, you know, physically distanced in the classroom, when we're in the red stage, that means you really can't, students can't visit each other from residence hall to residence hall. Very limited opportunities to interact with people. And so those opportunities, even though remotely, to participate in arts activities, I think are critically important.
Yeah. And are any of those, you know, I'm sure we'll spend some time talking about your plans for the future, but it does, one of the questions that keeps coming up as we think about the impact of the pandemic and where we're heading next is, what will we keep?
Yes.
What will we let go? It does sound like, in terms of opening up access to the arts to more people in new ways, that does sound like perhaps a silver lining from what we've experienced in this past year. Maybe beginning with you, Dr. Crutcher, and then I'd love to get some of your perspective, Terri, as well. Any of the positive elements, things we've learned that you think are going to change the way higher education and our lives work in the future?
Well, I certainly, you know, I mean, as I said earlier, we are a university, you know, we have an 8-to-1 student faculty ratio. So that close interaction with faculty is critically important. We have already said next year, we will not be doing any online or hybrid teaching unless something untoward, you know, God forbid, happens. Right. Like there's another spike. That doesn't mean we won't be doing it anywhere at all, because we had been doing that in our school for continuing and professional studies and in our master's in business administration. But where I do see that we have real opportunities in 2 areas. One, I think in providing access to content for students, so that they get the content online, and then that frees up the professor to interrogate that content, because we know that students learn more deeply when they are required to engage in a conversation about what they've read or about what they've learned.
Mhm.
So that's one thing. And with respect to our parents and our alums, a whole new area has opened up to us, I believe. And I can't tell you how that's going to manifest itself. I can tell you how I think of. I mean, for instance, we have a lecture series here called the Sharp Viewpoint Series that brings in speakers from various political viewpoints and perspectives. This year, we've been able to have the largest audiences any time in history, because they were all online. You could sign up for them, and I think there are lots of opportunities for connecting and engaging our alums and parents that we can take advantage of utilizing Zoom or whatever platform you might utilize.
Yeah. How about you, Terry? You're going to be teaching online mainly, although I guess you'll be up and down to Montreal a little bit, but how are you expecting that to play out? And how do you think, what have you learned over the past year? And for you, you're going back into academia, so you might have some different perspective there.
Yeah, well, I think there's so many tools. I guess the one thing I've learned is that there's an amazing number of tools out there for faculty to really succeed at teaching online. And so I'm looking forward to taking advantage of those. But to reflect on what Dr. Crutcher was just saying is that as a parent, my son is at Lewis and Clark in Portland. And as a parent, I felt like I had more access to the institution this past year than I did previously, because meetings, the president would do his broadcast. I couldn't make it to his Christmas party at his house, and so he did it online this year. It's like, oh, look, I actually get to be at the president's Christmas party. And there's all these different things that like my son is on the track team, and they've been live streaming the track meets. I can't go up to Portland every week for his track meets. So there's all these different ways that I feel like we've learned to re-engage that we haven't been able to do before. And so I think that's been, and also music-wise, my husband and I, we like classical music as well, but we're both very much into jazz. And so the San Francisco Jazz has had their Friday events, and now they're starting to do more on demand. And so, it's kind of, we had kind of stopped driving up to San Francisco for the events because we just were getting lazy, but now we're paying a lot more attention to what's going on. And, just a lot of different things that I've done in the last year that I would not have done because I didn't want to go to the venue or, whatever it may be.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting too. I think just to see how things blend together in the future. Academic conferences in particular are something that I think had to go all the way online, and now we're at this sort of in-between phase where people are starting to think about bringing people back in. But when you do that, can you still keep some of those access points open? It looked like you were going to say something, Dr. Crutcher.
Well, I just was going to say, and Terry, please call me Ron.
Okay, fine.
With respect to performing organizations, I mean, I've played the cello forever. I mean, since I was a young, 14 years old. And never would I have believed that you could do a concert online and have the same kind of emotional experience. But that's what we've experienced this year. And not only that, last summer, I played a recital on the Symphony Summer Series. They had 40 people in the audience in an auditorium that held 200. But guess what? Over 400 people watched me perform all around the world, which would not have happened.
Yeah.
So it was really, it was an amazing experience. And the sound quality, because I was able to go back and listen to it, was not the same as being in the room, of course, but it was not bad. It was pretty good.
Yeah,
and our symphony, I'm on the board of the Richmond Symphony. I mean, we figured it out because we were all terrified at first. What we're going to do? We don't want to lay the musicians off. We want to be able to do concerts. And this year we had Richmond Symphony has a commitment to having diverse composers and performers as well. Well, with our very talented new music director and our artistic director, they came up with a program with a smaller group of musicians that has been incredibly engaging for our audiences. And we actually have more people now than we had before, listening into those into those concerts.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it does touch on the other main theme that we've been hitting on a lot here as well, is just around diversity and access. Social justice has been another macro trend that we've been talking about a lot since last summer, right on through, unfortunately, the continued problems we've had with policing in the US, but also at least we did have some resolution around a verdict recently. I did want to pivot into both of your books and hear really the two of you maybe talk more to one another about connections between the two, because I do think they are, they're both really interesting. They're both very personal memoirs that I think, Terri, you've talked a lot about the importance of vulnerability and building that trust and psychological safety. An element of leadership, I think, is putting yourself out there first so that others can sort of follow your lead and feel some sense of comfort and, that it's safe to share. Terri, I know you wanted to pick up on some specific aspects out of radical empathy, and then I'd love to dive in as well into I had no idea you were Black, which is I think that story in and of itself is one that we are going to want to hear as well, because that's quite a title. But maybe beginning with you, Terri, any initial thoughts?
Well, I was pleasantly surprised when I got the book and saw the title and everything, because I've heard that, of course, as well. When you're well spoken and you talk to people on the phone and they haven't actually met you, and then they meet you and it's like, oh, I didn't know you were Black.
Yeah.
But one thing, the first thing I want to jump in on is this issue. So we went through along with the pandemic. On top of that, we had this whole season of protest. And I was, I know some of the issues that were coming up at the University of Richmond, and then the names of buildings and so on. And, I told some friends there, I said, well, I was at UT Austin for 12 years, and every one of the days I was there, I passed by a statue of Jefferson Davis and a whole bunch of other Confederates. And, my sons went to Robert E. Lee Elementary. And, we went through that struggle in Austin and actually they're going through this struggle right now over the Eyes of Texas. And so, they did end up changing the name of the school. And Robert E. Lee Elementary didn't make any sense in Austin. It's like he had no connection to Austin. Right. And it was one of those schools named in the 1930s, kind of thing. And so they changed it to a Lee, who was a photographer and well-known photographer in Austin. So that made sense. And then, of course, they moved the statues into a museum. And they still don't know what they're doing about actually, they had a very comprehensive report that came out about the Eyes of Texas. And yet I talked to my colleagues there, and they still feel like the issue is still very much up in the air. So I know you've struggled with this issue, and you actually talk about it right at the beginning of the book. So I'm just curious, if how you feel as you're, I know you're on your way out, but that, how, it seems like there's so many other things that could be part of the legacy, as in terms of starting African and African American Studies department and so on, and how you're seeing that dynamic going on now.
Yes, well, for us, it's a well. First, let me back up. In my third year here, I put together a President's Commission on History and Identity, headed up by Ed Ayers, our former president, who's a renowned Southern historian, because I felt there were parts of our history that had gone untold. Stories. I mean, for instance, I'll give you this anecdote. When I was introduced as president, I was introduced to a man named Barry Green. I was told he was the first African American to live on the campus back in 1968. Well, lo and behold, it turns out that he wasn't by himself when he came here. There were 3 other women who were enrolled in 68, although they did not live on campus, they lived at home. And so in November of 2018, we did a commemorative reception to commemorate 50 years of African Americans on the campus. And we, excuse me,
Allergies.
at the same time, we announced this commission.
Mhm.
And later, about 6 months later, student governments came forward with this resolution. We want you to remove the names of Robert Ryland and Freeman from these two buildings, one an academic building, one a residence hall. And we got some historians to do the work because no one really knew the full stories. We knew Ryland had been an enslaver, but he had also been the minister of the First African Baptist Church, the largest Black Baptist church at the time. And we didn't know a lot about Freeman except that he had won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. He won for a biography of Robert E. Lee. And we're, as Terry knows, we're in the middle of dealing with this right now. And so the approach that I wanted to take was one in which, rather than kind of forgetting about the history, forgetting that in 1965, the university community felt well enough about Douglas Southall Freeman, though he was a segregationist and a eugenicist to boot, to name a building after him, right? And then Robert Ryland was our founder. But as you well know, I think because of the overlay of everything that's been happening in the last year, and because people really don't read that closely, even though I did make a video to explain the rationale for the history. And one thing I might add, by the way, had it been left up to me alone, I would have put together another commission to take the histories of the histories that had been produced. One was 150 pages, look at them, have some open fora so we'd hear how the community responded. But that was a decision that was the board didn't want to do that, the board leadership. And so that's what we're doing. We're going to do that now. We've taken a step back. But what
I'm
I
glad to hear
did,
that.
but in order to thread the needle, what I did suggest was that rather than leaving Freeman's name there by itself, we learned in the history that there was a Black man named John Mitchell who was born as an enslaved man, who edited a Black newspaper, who at every opportunity would provide a counterpoint to Freeman's racist editorials. In fact, sometimes printing Freeman's words and then his rejoinder there, which took a lot of courage at that particular time.
Yes.
This would have been in the early 1900s. I talked to his descendants. They thought it would be a great idea. We were going to name the hall Mitchell Freeman, because I wanted to put into, kind of contrast those two individuals. Now, my hope had been, quite frankly, that eventually it would just be called Mitchell. People would forget about Freeman. But of course, what happened is that our whole approach was framed in a binary. And our local newspaper didn't help us there. There was an editorial that said, University of Richmond has to decide. You're either for the Black students or you're for white supremacy. And of course, it's a lot more complicated than that, needless to say. Nonetheless, even though I've said to people, this is not the way I'd like to end my presidency here, this is a good sign, because I knew inevitably we were going to get to this place at some time in our evolutionary pathway toward becoming a truly inclusive community. And so I thank the students who were organized, the Black students who've organized this, for raising everyone's consciousness. Because now we've been attentive to helping everyone feel as though they belong and included at the campus. But now this is a clear signal that not everyone feels as though they belong. So, therefore we have a lot more work to do.
Right.
I don't feel we haven't failed because we've made progress.
Well, yeah.
We're not there yet, right?
Yes. And that's what I like to remind people, even the fact that I'm going to McGill University to be, an advisor to the provost on anti-Black racism. They're at the early stages of this, right? And we can't just go, okay, we're going to hire 85 Black faculty now,
right.
And so we have to have some patience with the process, obviously. And I think that comes across, it's hard because students especially are often impatient. And want things to happen yesterday. And but on the other side of it, we have, I don't know, we're just in such an interesting time, because it seems like we're really at a time of reckoning. And I wrote my book mostly before George Floyd and his murder and all of those other the protests that happened last summer, although I incorporated it in before I published it. And even with COVID. And so I feel like we're in this unusual time period where there's a lot more impatience with change, and which is appropriate, right?
It's appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, you look at our life stories, and yeah.
I mean, come on, when I graduated from college, I graduated from undergraduate school in 1969. And I believed in my heart, I really believed this, that by the turn, at those days, the turn of the millennium was a big deal. I thought that by 2000, at least universities and colleges would have dealt with these issues, and there'd be no need for Black studies or women's studies. We would have, infused the scholarship about Blacks and women into the scholarship in various areas in the academy. And of course, that didn't happen. And here we are in 2021. So it's I can understand the students' impatience. I'm impatient, but at 74 years old, I have a different view and perspective, having gone through the civil rights era back in the 60s. But as I said before, I've applauded the students for their activism, quite frankly, because they have indeed raised the consciousness. And the one thing I just said earlier today, a lot of attention was turned to our board. And I want to remind people, boards of trustees don't teach students in classrooms. Faculty teach the students in the classrooms. And so that's why I'm happy that they've raised the consciousness, because hopefully now, because, as well as I do, Terri, faculty don't like mandatory training or mandatory educational stuff, right? But maybe this will raise their consciousness so that they will be more aware of the impact of their behavior on students in their classes on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. And that's, academia, we could just talk about that for a while, but it has a lot of work to do. And, but even just from, my own experiences from faculty all the way up to boards of trustees and so on. I mean, there's just a lot of work to do. But I want to come back to some of our areas of commonality. And I have to read this one passage from your book, because I was reading the book and I'm like, oh my God, this is just so much in line with what I've experienced. And this has to do when you went to Miami of Ohio. And as you say, as I think back, I'm not entirely sure why I avoided the Black Students Association at Miami, but I suspect it stemmed from my concern about being viewed as other. I was attending a predominantly white university and I wanted to fit in. I did not want to be singled out as different in any way. Every day in class, a constant refrain played through my head. I would show my white classmates that I was just as smart as they were. And you could have lifted that out of my book, because so my story was that I get to Stanford, and there was the Black orientation and the regular orientation. And I was like, well, I'd like to go to the Black orientation, but if I go to the Black orientation, then I have to leave the other orientation. And, is everybody gonna, so, isn't it sad that we're stuck in these?
It is. It really is.
So I read that and I was like, okay, we've had very similar, and my experience was in 1983.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you one other thing while I'm thinking. Your father passed away, even though
Yes.
there's a differential, the same year as my mother.
Interesting.
Your father, I think, in June of 2001.
Yep.
Is that right? And my mother, November the 14th.
June 13th.
Yeah, June 13th. Wow. And she was November the 14th, 2000. I mean, she was 5 years older. Your father was 73.
Yeah.
Right. And she was 78 at that. She had multiple myeloma. She'd been sick for 8 or 9 years. But that must have had it. I mean, because you were young then.
Well, I was, he'd had me when I was, 2001, I was 37.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was,
That's young.
Yeah, that's young. Well, it's interesting because my son was 9 months old, and I always say, what got me through that, because he was the first very close family member I lost. and what got me through that was that I had a 9-month-old. It's like that moment is very clear where we're leaving the funeral and getting ready. The funeral was in Spokane, where I grew up, and we were driving back to Seattle, where I was living at the time. And we get in the car, and my son's sitting there, and I'm like, okay, I don't have time to do anything except take care of this.
Take care of the son, right? Because he doesn't have anybody else.
That's right. Yeah. So that pulled me through. But that was really the start of my kind of awakening to these health disparities. And that's what really kind of pushed me along, especially, and then I ended up losing more family members because of health disparities. And some the various types. And that's what really got me into was eventually writing this book. But I'm curious, what kind of drove you to write your book?
Yes, well, it was long in the making. And so it really started back in 2006. I was asked to be a keynote speaker. AACNU.
Oh yeah, of course.
And every year at our annual conference, we have a luncheon for faculty and staff of color. And so they asked me to speak, and I did a speech on, I think I called it Spiraling Through the Glass Ceiling, 7 Lessons for Any Aspiring Leader in Higher Education, or something like that. And it got a lot of good attention. I wrote an article about it. And then a couple of years later, I was with Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks?
Yeah, the poet.
Yeah. What did I get her name right? Bell Hook? Yeah, Bell Hook.
Yes.
On Martha's Vineyard. And we had a conversation on the porch, and she said, you need to write a memoir. And I said, I don't have time to write a memoir. I'm president of the college. She said, sit down, take a tape recorder, and just start recording your stories. And that's how I got started. I took that article, and that was a part of it, and I just started telling the stories into the tape recorder, and I had someone transcribe them. And then eventually I started the serious work of working with an editor and getting a proposal and all of that. I went to Germany on a sabbatical after having been a president at Wheaton College for 10 years, was going to finish the book. But when we got to Berlin, I said to my wife, we may never again have an opportunity to do what we want to do on somebody else's dime. Let's just enjoy ourselves. So I put it to bed. I did send it to someone to read, and they gave me some good feedback. And then a couple of years later, I was having dinner in Seattle, Washington, with a parent who, and it came up, and he said, send me the manuscript. I'm interested. He found an agent for me, and that's how it got published.
Yeah. Well, you brought up Germany. We have to talk about Germany. Because now, I went there as a political scientist studying immigration politics. And so I think my awareness of race was probably a little higher than yours, because I was really, interacting with the Turkish community and seeing what was going on at the political level. But I thought it was really interesting, the kind of experiences you had there.
Yes, well, for me too, remember, I was there in 1972.
Right.
So 1972 was just 3 years after Ostpolitik began under Willy Brandt. And that was just at the time when the Gastarbeit and the guest workers were coming from Turkey and from Italy and from Greece. So that was early days. But for me, what really got my attention were 2 things. Number one, that I didn't have to explain why I decided to become a professional cellist.
Right.
As a matter of fact, people's eyes brightened when they learned that I was a professional cellist. And then secondly, that within 6 months there, I suddenly realized that I felt unencumbered by race, much more so than in the United States. And let me just explain the reason, one of the reasons for that. There are 2 reasons for it. One is that after the Goethe Institute, at the end, my teacher said to me, when you go to Bonn, which is where I was living, the capital at the time, people are going to automatically speak English to you because you're a Black American. Do not speak English back. He said, speak only German back to them. The best advice anyone could ever give me, because as they would say something to me in English and I would respond in German, and what would happen? Oh, kannst schon Deutsch. And their whole demeanor changed. Yeah. Their entire demeanor. The other factor was that I was fortunate, and you read about the Patriot family that I lived with for 3 years. I lived with this family, American mother, German father, 4 boys. They treated me like their 5th son. She washed my clothes for me. 3 of the boys had birthdays in February. My birthday's in February. She'd had birthday parties for me. I am positive, Terri, had it not been for that experience, for them embracing me and making me feel at home in their home, I doubt that I would have this affinity, this close affinity to Germany today.
But I do have a very warm feelings because, I spent time in France and Germany and the UK, and some of my best friends came out of my, interactions in Germany. And there are people I'm still in contact with that I met when I was a graduate student. And I thought about that a lot. And I think part of the reason is, first of all, Germans are, especially young Germans, when I was there in the 90s and the early 2000s, were just very open.
Yes.
And they, I lived in a WG, the Wohngemeinschaft, basically a dorm, when I was at the University of Constance in 1995. And it was seamless, it was, I had a really good experience. I learned German I'd already taken some German, but I learned German very quickly. And you're right, that ability to go in and just start speaking in German, even, in doing my interviews with politicians, just made a huge difference. And, I had a few run-ins because I would be at these big events and people would, but my favorite was when I went to an event and they asked me if I was the ambassador from South Africa. I almost said yes.
No, aber natürlich.
Indeed. But I couldn't say that. So, and unfortunately, I did not get the royal treatment. But
well, I will tell you this: my trio. So I played in the same same piano trio, violin, cello, and piano, for almost 40 years. They live in London, England. She's American, but her parents were German extraction, and he is Welsh. And when we went to Germany to perform for the first time, we performed in Munich at a concert hall there called the Gaststeig. And they told me when we got off the plane, we flew from London to Munich. They said to me when we got off the plane, it was though I had come back home. My whole demeanor changed.
It's like,
yeah, and it's still, and my wife sees that. And now, fortunately, one of the reasons my wife and I spent our sabbatical in Germany after 10 years at Wheaton was because my wife has been there with me many, many times. We spent our honeymoon with the Patriots, as a matter of fact, in 1979, but she'd never lived there before. And she now has the same relationship to Germany that I had after having lived in Berlin. Actually, what happened is that she had an opportunity a year before we went there to live. Someone invited her to a wedding, to accompany her to a wedding in Berlin, and she went for 7 days and fell in love with the city. And now it's, when we go back, she doesn't speak German as well as I do, but my wife is one of these people who never meets a stranger. So she is very comfortable there, and it's like has become a second home to her. We didn't go back. Last year was the first year since 1978 when I had not been to either England or Germany. And we really missed it. And we were planning to go again in July, but we've changed it because of everything that's happening. So we're going to go in September. I'm going to be speaking at a conference in Romania. But it really does, when I tell people, and I'm sure you have this experience, Terri, when I talk to people about Germany, they sometimes look at me like, how can you say that about Germany? They have these thoughts about Germany, I think as a result of, the Nazis and the World War II, but I have a very special relationship there and enjoyed it immensely.
Are there lessons that we can learn from either your experiences traveling, your experiences in Germany, or with German culture that can help inform how to navigate some of the challenges we're facing in the US?
But let me jump in, because one of the things that both Ron and I talk about is that that history, right? The Holocaust and the Stolperstein.
Yes.
And I've had so many conversations with people in Germany, and that's the thing, is they're open, they talk about it. And I think that's what's different. And that's what I talk about in the last chapter of my book, is this idea, for Germany at the end of the war, it was more of a punitive approach versus South Africa, kind of reconciliation. And so I think we can learn something about this. The Germans aren't perfect by any stretch. They've had very recent issues with this stuff. But there is, I think, a path to reconciliation that we have not been on as a country. And I'm curious what you think about that.
No, Terri, I agree with you. I haven't gotten to the last chapter of your book, so we're looking forward to that. Yes. I mean, as you saw in my book, I talked about the Stolpersteiner and the fact that Germans are purposeful about not forgetting the history. Now, it is true, in Berlin, there is no marker to indicate where Hitler is buried. Right. But when you take a walking tour, they will take you to, it's buried under a parking lot. There's no sign there or anything there. What I found really, really impactful in our neighborhood in Berlin, we lived in Charlottenburg on Blumsenstrasse, one street over from the Kurfürstendamm. And you'd walk along the streets and you see these little plates. They were metal plates with the names of the Jewish families who lived in the house in front of them. Those are the Stolpersteine, or the stumbling stones. And once a year, people in the neighborhood will come out with candles. They'll shine the signs, shine the stones, and there's a kind of a celebration. Again, not forgetting that history. This is what our fellow Germans, did to people who were our fellow citizens. We've never done that, with the exception of what Brian Stevenson has done in Montgomery, Alabama, to memorialize those many African Americans who were lynched, and it's
including one of my relatives.
What do you say?
Including one of my relatives.
Oh wow! And have you gone to the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin?
Yes.
Well, Brian's memorial.
Well, I've been to his memorial.
It's it's quite moving to go there. It's really, my wife's from Tuskegee, so one of our Christmas visits, we went over there. It's quite moving. I can't wait to go back. But we've not done that otherwise. Right. United States.
No, I agree. Yeah. Brian Stevenson's the Memorial for Peace and Justice, for those who don't know, is in Montgomery, Alabama. And I actually, when I heard that was opening, I knew I had to go, because I have a friend who's at University of Alabama, and we'd been talking for a few years about me coming out and doing. And so I did a tour. I flew into Atlanta, went to University of Georgia, which was eye-opening to see all the signs talking about Civil War battles. And then they stop in Atlanta, did talks at Georgia Tech and Emory, and then went to the Martin Luther King Memorial and all of that, is the park basically, and then to Alabama and to Montgomery. And I started walking through that memorial, and I just knew something had told me when it opened that I had to go. And then as I was walking through it, each column has it has a county, and I thought, well, wait, my mom is from Opelousas, Louisiana. What parish is that, which is a county in Louisiana? And I looked it up, St. Landry. So St. Landry happened to be towards the end, and we get there, and I look, and there is the name Julian Stelly, and my mother's maiden name is Stelly.
Wow, amazing.
So the magic of the internet, I look up, and in one of the family trees, I was able to find his name, and I was just like blown away at that point. And because one of the things that I think we both experienced, because of the time period we grew up in, 60s and 70s and so on, is that we, like you said earlier, we thought this issue of race was behind us, and we didn't. And even our parents, I think part of the reason I just didn't, we want to move on, we want to assimilate, we want to be part of the broader culture. But I think what we've learned in the last few years, especially, and what I learned in the process of writing my book, is how important the history is. Yes. And how, and that we should not, turn away from it, and that we need to understand it, because we can't understand it without or we can't get past it without understanding it. And we don't want to get past it. We want to, and that's what I think, to come back full circle, that's the German lesson, right? And that the fact that Germany has, not everybody and not everywhere, but to a certain extent has dealt with this in a very different way, I think is a model and a lesson for us.
And they also look, I mean, because of the nature of the household that I lived in there, I'm still very close to my German family. And when everything was happening last May, I was getting texts from them and photographs. I mean, I remember one of my German brother's wives sent me a photograph of a demonstration at the Cologne Cathedral. They live in Cologne. And she wrote and she said, I'm glad that people are demonstrating, but she said, as if we don't have problems of our own here around these issues.
Oh, I know.
But nonetheless, what I was hoping was that, that movie footage of Chauvin putting his, put on George Floyd's neck, kind of was like something that had reverberated around the world. Mm-hmm. And I was hoping and still hope that it would mean an inflection point for us here in the United States that will move us closer to really beginning to reckon with institutional racism and things of that sort.
Yeah, and it seems like there has been a bit of an awakening. I think the question is how much will maintain, and how do we build in structures and techniques. Terri, I know you do a lot of training, and it sounds like you even did some training at the University of Richmond. What are both your thoughts around how we train faculty and staff and onboard students, and get the right mix of people in a campus so that we can begin to have these difficult conversations? Because I think there's also a risk around, we do have a tendency, and I think you're both touching on this in the US, to just avoid discomfort. Mm-hmm. So I'd be curious, really, from each of you, what have you seen worked? Any advice or recommendations as we try to move forward here?
Well, if I can speak for Ron, I think we both would agree that vulnerability, my first step in radical empathy is that vulnerability. Yes. And being open to the experiences of others. And I think that's a first step. And that's what I try to tell. Basically, we're both modeling that in our books. And people may not agree with everything we talk about, or the different things the way we approach it. But I think, one of the reasons I pursued the way I do this is because we weren't making progress. We aren't hiring enough Black faculty. We aren't hiring enough. I mean, it's interesting because people focus on Black faculty, but the percentage of Hispanic and Latino faculty is even worse in comparison to their population. There's so many areas where we need to do serious work, and we have to get uncomfortable and say, no, it is not okay to have, and I don't know what your business school is like, but typically, business schools, that is entirely white male. Mm-hmm. And the problem with academia is we haven't even gotten where we need to be with women.
That's right. Right. Well, we're not entirely white male, but close to it.
Yeah.
But no, I couldn't agree with you more. And Mike, your point, one of the things that I think I cited this in my book. If you think about this, the Public Religion Research Institute did a survey, I think it was 2016, that showed that 91% of whites have only other whites as part of their close network. 84% of Blacks, 83% of Blacks, 64% of Hispanics. And so if you think about a residential college university campus or college university campus, we invite our students to come into what we call our, kind of multicultural communities. But without the understanding that our students don't really have an experiential base from which to develop relationships across racial differences or political differences or religious differences. So we have to help them do that. Mm-hmm. We have to work. And one of the things I believe very strongly, and I just said it earlier today, if we're going to resolve the problem, it's not simply a head problem. Terri knows this. It takes the head and the heart. Otherwise, nothing's going to change. right?
Mhm.
And for me, I mean, I think, finding ways to be vulnerable through intergroup dialogue can be be one access point here. The University of Michigan has for years had a very successful intergroup dialogue approach. That's not the only way, but that's one approach to the issue.
Yeah, and at University of Texas at Austin, we had the difficult conversations
Yes.
program, and I worked with Glenn Singleton and his gosh, and I'm going to forget all of these different names. But again, it's about having uncomfortable conversations. As Dee say, we have to get comfortable with being, but we all have to be get uncomfortable, right? It's I mean, yes, African Americans obviously have undergone a lot, and but I had to, that's why I mentioned that the reading I did, because for us, we grew up in an environment where we were expected to assimilate into white society. And so for me, I can say that, well, for both of us, obviously, it made us uncomfortable at times being in Black only spaces. And so I've had to come to grips and, say that, and I agree completely with Kelly saying that the dynamic of healing is uneven between the aggressor and the other. Absolutely, 100%. But the problem is we have to acknowledge internalized oppression.
That's right. Absolutely.
Because we all, especially here it's a very different dynamic in Germany. Here we have this situation where, whiteness is the norm. And so, for me, that meant that, okay, I know white, and not that I was thinking this consciously, but as we go through our careers, like, okay, whiteness is okay. I have to adapt myself to this rather than saying it has to be a two-way street, right? These people have to, I have to be able to be myself, and these people have to adapt to me. It's not just me adapting to them. So I think that's where we have to take that internalized oppression and turn it around and say, no, I do not have to compromise who I am in order to just please this group of people, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I'll share, an anecdote. I don't know if I mentioned this in the book or not, but when I was at Wheaton, one of my colleagues, who's a good friend of my wife's, from Jamaica, African American woman from Jamaica, who was an outstanding faculty member, and one of her white colleagues one day said to her, "Oh, I won't say the name. You're being so Jamaican." And my friend looked at her and said, "Isn't that why you brought me here?" In other words, I don't want to change who I am and conform to your social, your social folk ways. I want to come. I mean, it's what, Dr. Howard Thurman once said: when you invite the unknown brother, and I always say and sister, into your midst, and do not allow their presence to change your culture, you're missing an opportunity. Missing a real opportunity. And so it's not that, you invite Black, Brown, Hispanic people and Asians into your white community and expect them to be like you. You will invite them and expect that the culture will change in some fashion, and in good ways, right?
Yeah. And even your anecdote about the name of the title of the book, the fact that someone was saying, "I had no idea you were Black," in I guess a somewhat innocuous way, but can you share a little bit of that story?
Yeah, Mike. So what happened is that when I was at UT Austin as the head of the Butler School of Music, well, it wasn't called Butler School of Music at that time, but head of the School of Music, I wanted to get some scholarship money from a foundation that gave scholarships for a violinist. So I made the trip down to Houston, and as I was shaking the hand of this CEO of an oil company, sitting down, he looked at me and he said, "I had no idea you were Black." And at first I got really angry. And I thought, okay, let's just listen, see where this is going. And then he went on to say, "Perhaps you can help me. My wife and I have been going to the Aspen Music Festival for more than 30 years, and we rarely see any Black violinists. Why is that?" And so then we engaged into this really great conversation about why that was, what we were doing at UT Austin. And I eventually got the money that I wanted for a scholarship. But I use that as a cautionary tale with my mentees, because, and it's like, so what would have happened if I had gotten angry and just left? Well, obviously I wouldn't have gotten the scholarship money. But more importantly, I found myself engaged in a conversation with a man who had something in common with me, the love of music.
Yeah, and even,
Right.
you know, and there was an opportunity there. And I guess I know we're close on time, but how do each of you gather the reserve to be able to be gracious and find that opportunity in others? Because it does seem like it's got to be exhausting. So I'd be curious.
It's
I know
so
we're
funny.
at concluding thoughts, but I just
Well,
was curious.
I got that exact same question at lunch a couple of days ago with a friend who just read my book. And I said, you know what? Look, we can't get out of the sea. You know, we're here, you know, this is my background. It's like we're in the sea. So we have to swim through it. And you can either, it's not either or, you adapt. You know, sometimes I'm frustrated and angry, and sometimes I just focus on my family and the fact that I've had an amazing career, and the joy of that, and the joy of living in California, and the joy I'm going to have of trudging through the snow in Montreal. I mean, you know, it's like it's you know, it's always there, but we have to live our lives. And you know, and you know, both Ron and I are people who are out there in the front, and we, you know, I'm not going to relinquish that, you know, because I'm getting, you know, tired of it. I mean, all I have to do is think about my grandfather, who was a sharecropper in Louisiana, and how incredibly proud he is of me. And you know, my mother, who unfortunately has passed, but is, you know, she was a seamstress. And you know, I know, I mean, it's so funny. I remember one time, and I get the chills thinking about it, but I was on a plane flight flying home from seeing my mom when she was ill, and I had this weird, you know, imagery of all of these ancestors were just there with me and saying, Terri, you're going to get through this. And we all have challenges in our life, whether, you know, at that point, my challenge was watching my mother struggle through a very, you know, a life-ending illness.
Yeah.
There are always going to be these times of struggle. And for me, I'm so fortunate that I have that sense of this huge legacy behind me. And I'm sorry, Ron, I want to give you a chance to chime in.
No. I mean, I'm just shaking my head. I mean, I think almost every day. Well, I don't go into office now, but when I would go into the administration building, I think about my foremothers and forefathers. I think about my father, the first Black manager at the world's largest machine tool company, who on the day that he got his advancement, his boss, now his peer, said to him, yeah, well, to celebrate, why don't you mop my office for me? And I remember when my father told me the story, I said, and you did it? You know? And my father said, yeah, he wanted me to get angry. I wasn't going to get angry. I went ahead and mopped it. He found a way to get back at him, by the way. That's another story. But you know, but for me, Mike, to answer your question, through chamber music. I started playing chamber music when I was 15. And the difference between playing in a chamber music group where you don't have a conductor and an orchestra where you do have a conductor is that the decision-making has to be collaborative. And you have to make music with people who are very different from you, sometimes who have different political perspectives. And you just do it because you all have that one thing in common. You want to play beautiful music to share it with others. And that has helped me immensely. And the other thing that's helped me is just having grown up in a household where I knew very early on that I was loved unconditionally. And we've tried to give that to our daughter. That's something no one can ever take from you. And when you have that, you know, people will tell you, I never refer to myself as President Ronald Crutcher. I always introduce myself as I'm Ronald Crutcher, President of the University of Richmond, and that's by design.
By the way, yeah, one last comment, because another thing we have to get together sometime over a Zoom glass of wine. But
I want to talk to you about your book more too.
Yes, absolutely. But we also have in common that we have a child with ADHD. And I'm sure we have some things to share around that, but we have to wrap up.
Yeah, but it was, we need to stay connected, Terri.
Yes, absolutely.
It was a wonderful conversation. We could have clearly gone on longer, and it sounds like at least two of you may pick up on the conversation down the road. Hopefully folks enjoyed listening. We'd love to hear back from anyone who's listening out there, either in the podcast or in the Zoom room. And thanks so much for joining us, Ron.